we're on. All right. Hi, my name is Bill. Cyclical Nature Bicycles is the shop, and been helping out and part of the Central Ohio Triathlon Club now for maybe since 2011, 12. Just helping out with clinics and keeping the clients on their bikes, service work, and new bike sales, fittings, things like that. So today we're gonna do a quick run through of what it takes to change a flat on the side of the road while you're training or racing. And then follow up at the very end. I'm going to start with the front wheel. And then once the flat tire change is done, then we'll discuss a little bit about the rear gears and what it would be like to change this on the side of the road. The front wheel is obviously easier to take on and off than the gears, than the rear wheel because of the gears. But, you know, you need to know how to do both of them because you're just as likely to get one on the front as you are in the rear when you're out there in the real world. So to keep them from, to keep the issues from getting combined, we'll do the front tire repair on the front, and then we'll do a quick on and off of the rear wheel through the gears and kind of a quick explanation on how these things actually work and how you can make some small adjustments if you need to. So I have a quick procedure sheet that I made up a few years back, and this will be included on the website on the post to download a copy of this. And it's pretty simple. I'm just going to go through it from A to Z. Step one is, you know, you got to concern yourself with safety. My first thing is to get off the trail, find a safe area to work while preparing your bike. People are distracted by someone on the side of the road, and you're likely to cause another accident or injure yourself or another rider. So figure it like this: you've hit something, you've hit glass, or you've hit a pothole, or you've hit something that's given you a flat. And now you're 10 feet away from that exact item on the side of the road, changing your flat. And every other person that's riding by is looking at you, not what you hit. And they're just going to end up with a flat or a problem too. So get yourself away from the side of the road, get yourself into a safe place, maybe find some shade. What you think might take 5 minutes might take 15 or 20. So a lot of the problem with changing the flat on the side of the road is actually, it's all mental. You get frustrated, especially if it's in a race or you're really working out and the adrenaline's going and your body's full load. Hey guys, no more tape. You know, when you're in full workout mode, it's to stop and change the flat. It's like a mental shift. So step one, consider the situation, what's going on there, be safe, get your bike out of the way, concern yourself with the other riders in the area. Clear your debris out of the way. If there's a broken bottle there that you got a flat on, go clean the bottle up, get it out of the way for the next guy. Relax, mentally prepare, you know, regroup. You want to do this once, you want to do it right, then you want to get back out on the road instead of having to do it 2 or 3 times. If you blow a tube while changing out a flat, all you've done is set yourself further back. So when it comes to actually getting onto the bike, step 4, prepare the bike. So if you got a flat tire, you're not going to have to open the brakes. Get the wheel out. But when you have the tire fully inflated, the rubber is going to hit the brake pads. You're not going to be able to get the wheel all the way out. So there's a quick release on the brake to open up the brakes so that you can get the wheel out. Again, taking it out is not going to be a problem. Putting it back in with air might. So open up the brakes. If it's in the rear, you want to shift down into the fastest ring, the smallest ring on the outside, so that way the derailleur moves itself out of the way and you can get the wheel out of the frame. So in this case, again, we're going to work on the front. We've got the quick release lever that opens, and on the fork, there are little metal tabs or little tabs that keep the tire from completely falling out of the frame. So you'll have to loosen the rod, the skewer that goes through the fork so that you can get the front wheel all the way out of the bike. Before we get into this step, I like to prepare your tools because on your bag, you probably have a CO2 inflator, or clearly you're going to have a pump or a spare tube. When a tube comes out of a box, it's wrapped up like a ribbon like this, and it's been in there oftentimes for a couple of years. If you don't get a lot of flats, you know, your tube can be in your bag for a long time. So the first thing I like to do is get it out and get it inflated a little bit so it starts to hold its shape. And a lot of times if I can, I'll set this down like actually like somewhere in the sun so that it kind of gets pliable and stretches a little bit, because they need to be a little bit inflated to be the proper size to be fit into the bike. So this is a CO2 inflator with 2 full cartridges. It's pretty much all you need out on the road. These tools are tire levers, and they're used to help pry the tire off, which is really helpful for people who don't have a lot of practice, or if you don't have a lot of strength in your hands from doing this all the time. But there are more luxury you don't absolutely have to have. But more or less just a new tube and a way to inflate a pump or CO2. Most people use CO2 in racing because it's lighter, it takes up less space, and you're really quite unlikely to have to use it in a race. But this leaves you a little more room for nutrition and water and other things. So these thread together. There's a valve that you can open and close. We'll keep it closed. And I'm going to start by putting just a little bit of air in this tube. So just enough to give it a little bit of shape and stretch out, and then I'm just going to set it aside until I'm ready to use it. The nice thing about this CO2 gun and other ones that are out there that have an on-off valve is you can use a very small amount for finding your or for inflating your tube before use, and you can also use a partial container and reuse them. A lot of the cheaper ones that don't have an on-off valve, they're a one-time use. So these cartridges, this is about $20, and the replacement cartridges are about $4 or $5, maybe a little less. But you want to make sure you've got extras with you. So at this rate, we're going to take the wheel off the bike. I've got my tube laid out, my tools laid out is what I've got to use. I'm going to loosen this nut, which opens up the skewer, allows the wheel of the frame. This tire is not flat. If it were, I wouldn't have to let the air out, but in this case, when you let the air out, you want to take your valve cap off in this retaining nut. This nut keeps the valve from rattling. You want to put this on, you want to take it off first, and you want to put it back on last. It's absolutely not crucial. And if it gets lost or you don't have one, it's no big deal. Some tubes don't even have threads here, but it's just there to keep this from rattling. So this is where you use your tire levers. You can make sure that the tire is not stuck on the rim by just taking your hand and kind of massaging it a little bit. And you can use the lever. I start away from this valve. I always work opposite the valve because this is locked into place and it'll fight with you. If you work opposite here, you've got a lot more freedom to work. Lever pulls a little bit of the tire out of the way, and then you can clip it and use a second lever to finish. I like to use one if you can. Just a little bit of hand strength. You can slide that forward. And then you've got half the tire off. Do the same thing. Once you've got them separated, you usually set the wheel aside. The important thing to do is to find the damage in the tire. So if you've got a nail or a cut and you put a new tube in, you're going to be right back where you started from. You might get 2 or 3 rotations, it's just going to pop again. So it's really important. And again, this is why I like this tool with the on-off valve, is I can take this old tube and I can inflate it and look for the hole. Then I orient the tube back to where it is in the tire, and I try to find the hole in the tire. And the way we do it at the shop, and most enthusiasts who prepare for something like this, I always align the markings on the tire with the valve. So if I were to take this apart, I know that it only goes back in either this way, or if things got turned around on the ground, or if I laid my equipment down and I don't remember how it was in there. There's only two ways it goes in. It goes in either this way or this way. So if I've got a hole at 3 o'clock, I check at 3 and I check at 9. If I've got a hole at 6 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock. If I got a hole at 10 o'clock, I check at 10 and 2. But you can take your old tube and inflate it, and you can listen. The tube will get really expanded, but you can listen to it. Another kind of trick of the trade, I'd say, would be to lick your lips and put your mouth close to it. That little jet of air coming out, you can really feel that cold air on your lip. And then you can kind of hear the jet of air coming out too. If you carry a patch kit, now is a good time to identify where the hole would be and mark it so that if you get a second flat, which is unfortunate, but if you don't get the tire or the glass or the nail or the debris out of the tire, you can get a second flat. You can go back and you can identify where that hole is and patch it and reuse it again. I don't like to use a patch and then put it back in my bag. If I use the patch, I patch it and then I use it immediately because the pressure of the inflated tire pushing on the patch helps it seal. So I'd carry a patch kit with me as well. I don't have one here for the demo, but if you're going to carry a spare tube, a patch kit, they're made out of, they're stickers, they're latex stickers, and they're about 1 inch by 1 inch. It doesn't make any sense not to carry a pack of those as well. It's a good backup. So we're going to assume this one's bad. It's saying it's got a hole in it. We found the hole at, let's call that at about 11 o'clock. I'm going to look at my tire at 11, and I'm going to look at it at 1, and I'm going to try and pick out whatever debris is in the tire. If the tire is cut open or if it's really bad, you can use a dollar bill. You can use some leaves. You can use the packet from a gel. Anything you can do to line the inside of the tire to protect the hole from the tube popping out. So let's assume that we've found our debris. We've removed the debris. The tire is good and it's going back on. We've got our new tube that's been inflating, and it's ready to go in. So again, we orient the valve to a marking on the tire, a landmark on the tire that you can remember. This tube is a little easier to work with when it has a couple pounds of air in it. If it's completely deflated, it's like a ribbon and it falls all over the place. So once I've got the tube inside the rim or inside the tire, I can place the tire and inner tube assembly back on the rim. I start with the valve and then resting the tire against my waist to keep everything still and kind of locked in place. Then I work from there around both sides, pushing the tire on. I'm going to make this look really easy because I do it all the time, but with practice, anybody can do this. So as I push the tube in with my thumbs and I roll the edge of the tire over onto the rim, I do one side at a time. If you get the tire all the way on with two edges on the rim on one side and it's not on the other, you won't get it on. You have to do one side of the tire, then follow it with the other. So that's all it takes to get this tire mounted back up on this rim. It's a pretty easy combination, but again, I have a lot of practice. So I'm going to slowly inflate and look for a place where this inner tube has not cleanly fit inside the tire. A lot of times the inner tube can get caught or stuck in between the tire and the rim. So I'm going to inflate it really slowly and then inspect it. I'm looking for any variations in the rim and the tire. And I'm also feeling the tire to see if there's a divot or a dimple in the tire, which means that the tube's not sitting in the right spot. So at this point, on steps 7, 8, and 9, we've got the damage found. We've inspected it. We've remounted the tire onto the rim. Got a little bit of air in it. Step 10 is to inflate and inspect. So if there was a cut in the tire, this is the point where I would be looking to see if my repair with my dollar bill or some leaves or my gel pack is working. If it's splitting open and the tube is coming out, I'm gonna have to repair that better. But for the most part, I'm checking to see that the tire is mounting square on the rim. And then you can spin it and look for any lumps or lateral movement that would indicate that the tube is not seated in there correctly. This one's doing good. So I'm going to go ahead and run it up to its pressure. These mostly don't come with gauges. There are a few that have gauges that are a little more expensive and they're a nice feature. But typically a full CO2 container will take a tire about this size up to about 100 pounds of pressure, which is usually good enough to get you going. Because I use this up on pre-inflating the tube and checking my old tube for damage, there's not a lot of pressure left in it. So this one's already used up. And I can still squeeze this with my finger, and I know there's no way that's hard enough to ride on for very long. So I'm going to start with the second canister. These will get extremely cold, and it'll freeze to your hand if you're not careful. The first one I used had a little neoprene sock on it, and you would be wise to move this over to the new cylinder before you use it. So right now I'm pretty hard. I bet it could probably use 15 or 20 more pounds, but I don't have a gauge with me. And if I were on the side of the road, I'm assuming I would not have a gauge with me. I have a gauge here in the shop, obviously. But I would ride on this, and I would probably get to the next aid station or gas station or fire station or somewhere where you can either use an air compressor or air up your tire at the proper pressure and check it. If it's in the middle of a race, I'd probably get to the next transition and just move on. But tires mounted back up on the rim. Again, I'm going to mount the small nut that keeps things from vibrating and a cap on it, even though they're really not 100% necessary at this time. As far as putting it back in the bike, this quick release lever, I opened it. If it were closed, there's a chance the tire is not going to want to fit through. So when you pulled it out, it was flat. Make sure this is open. There are many YouTube videos out there showing you how to take a tire on and off of a bike. It's trial and error. So you're going to just take the time before you ride to practice taking it on and off. But you have to tighten the nut down on the front to get the right amount of tension so that the skewer lever clamps down the wheel safely and securely. So in this case, the lever starts to get tight at about straight in line. Now the last thing I'm going to do is check to see that I got the wheel inserted in the frame straight. If it's crooked, you'll get a little rub on the brake. Worse than that, though, is if it's really crooked and the tire is rubbing on the frame or rubbing on the brake, it'll burn a hole through the tire and then you'll be flat again and you won't be able to fix that because your tire will be shot. So I look to see that the brakes are operating evenly. Pretty good. I would finish this off and then double check it once I got home, make sure everything got done correctly. That's a quick and easy on how to get the tube in and out, switched out. And again, go through the procedure that I've got in practice. The rear is, in a lot of ways, it's easier because you don't have to adjust the tension on the rod, the skewer that holds the front wheel in. There are no safety tabs on the back. So if I pop the lever on the back, it's loose, it's ready to come out. I don't have to spin this knob. But it does have added complication of the derailleurs. Typically, the best advice I can give you is make sure that the derailleur is all the way shifted into the fastest gear. It's easy to forget to do this because you can get it out. It's difficult. But going to put it back in is really, really difficult if the derailleur is not all the way over into the fastest gear and out of the way. So in this case, same thing. We're going to loosen the brake. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to put this wheel in and fighting with the gears to find out that the whole time it's been banging up against the brake and you can't get the wheel in because the brake's tight. This has a horizontal dropout, which most of the triathlon bikes have. Road bikes have a vertical dropout. So on a road bike, you would pull this derailleur back and you could drop the wheel down in front of the derailleur. On a race bike like this, you pull the wheel out the back. That's made for aerodynamics. It's made so that the tire can tuck into the frame. And if you have different size tires, you can adjust this for a very tight clearance here. But it adds a little complication. In this case, you just got to get the chain out of the way. And again, a piece of advice is don't be afraid to get dirty. You're more likely to just go get nice and dirty right off the bat. And the process is going to take a lot less time. But you got to really grab that chain, pull it out of the way to get the wheel out. When you go to put it back in, you can put it on any of these lower gears. You know, the first 2 or 3 gears are close to where the derailleur is positioned. Once you start pedaling, the gears will mesh and everything will kind of come back into its place. This can be pretty frustrating if the chain falls out of alignment, or if the chain falls down in front of the gears down inside of here. So I would recommend for someone, again, a lot of the success in this kind of thing is being prepared ahead of time. Take a good look at the way this looks before you just tear the wheel off. Wrap your head around the orientation of how this looks, so that when you go to put the thing back together, you're not confused. You might even snap a shot of it with your phone. But for the most part, the rear wheel is actually a faster and easier installation compared to the front. You just have the added complication of getting around the gears. Once it's back lined up, just pedaling through the gears, everything will realign itself. You can shift into an easier gear. I'm going to take a quick break and ask for questions, and we'll see if there's any other issues that we want to touch on. Okay, so we opened the floor for Q&A and didn't seem to be a lot of questions. So I'm going to just finalize by just running through this real quick, just to make sure I've touched base on everything, as I would if I were really out on the road before I'd hop back on my bike and go. So safety, get off the trail, understand other people are probably looking at you. 2, clean up the mess that caused the problem in the first place. If there's a broken bottle, get it out of the way. 3, mentally regroup, prepare yourself for what you're going to do. Do it right, do it once, do it right the first time, save yourself the hassle. Prepare your equipment and your tools, get everything laid out. Find yourself a good clean area to work. Remove your wheel. Find the damage for your existing tube, so you can identify the hole, fix the tire, identify the hole in the tube so you can patch it. Remount the tire, inflate it up slowly, making sure that you don't have any rubber or debris pinched in the tire as you're putting it back together. Reinstall it to the bike, go through the gears. Last but not least, check your brakes, because both front and rear, I had you open up your brakes all the way so you can get the wheel out. So check your brakes before you hop back on the bike and take off, because you can easily get a quarter mile down the road and have to hit the brakes and realize that you don't have anything. So step number 13, lucky 13, it says check your brakes 3 times, 3 exclamation points. Make sure the bike's safe before you hop back on it. So that's it for changing the flat. I'll talk real briefly on the basics of how these work. And I'll say this much, there's not much that you can actually mess up by taking a screwdriver to your bike. You can get it out of adjustment, but there's not much that can't be put back in adjustment. So I'd encourage you to take the time to play with it and see what you can do. or ask questions to your local mechanic, or stop in the shop when you have the bike with you, and I can point out how things work. But for the most part, this bike is operated off of cables and springs. All of the brakes run off of a stainless steel cable. The shifters run off of a stainless steel cable, and the brakes and the shifters all have springs. So the cable pulls it one direction, the spring returns it to the other direction. So that's easy to understand with the brakes. You squeeze the brakes, you pull on the cable, the brake closes, stops the wheel. The spring on the brake opens up, allows the wheel to spin, and it pulls the cable back in the lever. That's an on-off situation. The shifting is a little more complicated, but the concept is the same. The shifting on the rear on this bike, there's 10 gears. Bikes have usually between 8 and 11. But for my shifter, for each individual position, each one of these clicks, there's an individual gear that matches up with it. So the way that you move this derailleur is by pulling that cable with the lever, and it'll move from a faster gear to a slower gear when you pull the cable, and then you release the cable and it returns back to a faster gear. If the cable stretches, or if the housing settles in, the cable is metal and it's braided, and some say they stretch, some say they don't stretch. I'm not going to debate whether the physics of the cable is actually stretching or not, but I will say that the bikes go out of adjustment. Sometimes the plastic housings and the metal in the housings, they compress from being under the spring load of the derailleur. Either way, you run into times where you need adjustments. The adjustments are made by pulling on the cable very, very finely. Whereas if you're shifting, you're pulling a whole gear. If there's 10 gears, one click is 1/10 of one shift. So you go throughout the whole cassette. The fine tuning is then done by this small adjuster, which if you loosen or tighten the adjuster, it's like an infinite adjustment to that big click of the lever. So what you'll find is that the gears will be making noise because the chain is not directly lined up with each one of these gears in the back. The way to adjust that is by adding or loosening tension on the cable. The front works identically, but there's only 2 positions on the front. Most road bikes will have 1 or 2. Some mountain bikes have up to 3, which makes it more complicated. But I'm going to focus on a double front chainring. The front derailleur only has 2 positions. It only has high and it has low. So there aren't the need for an adjuster on the front. You can manually adjust the front with your hand. On a road bike, you'll have the brake levers here, and they'll be indexed. On a road bike, you do have the need to adjust the tension on the front derailleur very finely, and there'll be a threaded adjusters, just like this adjuster here. On this bike, there'll be one of these adjusters on the frame, usually, where the cables run in, and then that can control and adjust the tension on the front derailleur. And the same thing applies. When you pull the lever on the front derailleur, it moves up to a big. When you reduce the lever, it goes back down to the small. And if it needs to be more or less, you can adjust that by finally adjusting this adjusting barrel. Typically what happens is the cables stretch and the housings collapse, which means that the cable has to be tightened, which is a counterclockwise movement of this adjuster. Start with a quarter of a turn and then test it to see if you've got an improvement in your shifting. Very small adjustments from this knob can fix your problems with gear alignment in the back, making noise and not shifting crisply. The adjustment screws, there's 2 screws on the rear derailleur, there's 2 screws on the front derailleur. Those are I'm going to encourage you a little less to adjust those, but you should still know what they do. There's one labeled with an H, one labeled with an L. The H is the high speed limit, which is the small ring in the rear. And the L is the low speed limit, which is the high ring, the big ring in the rear. On the front, it's opposite. The H, the high screw is the big ring, and the low screw is the small ring. When you tighten the screws, the derailleur travel becomes narrower. So for instance, if your chain is falling off your gears into the frame, you would tighten the high screw, which would stop the travel from falling off the cassette. If you had an issue where the chain was falling off of the low gear and getting stuck in between the wheel spokes and the cassette. That's the low gear. I would tighten the low screw and make that less able to fall off towards the inside of the bike. I would tighten those limits down. They're called limiting screws because they limit the amount of travel that the derailleur will go through its range. And that works on both the front and the rear. Once those are set, they usually don't ever have to be adjusted unless something has actually hit the derailleur and it's physically moved. If you hit your shoe hits this while you're clipping out, or you bang your front derailleur, you might have to readjust those limit screws. If your bike falls on the drive side and it bends the derailleur a little bit, you'll definitely have to adjust your high and low limit screws. But that is a lot less likely to happen than the cable needing a little bit of tensioning. On top of that, your best bet is to keep the bike aired up and lubed. Lubing the chain is really easy, and I relate it to vacuuming your house. If you vacuum your house every couple of days, you don't have to do a fantastic job of it because you're going to get it again. But if you only vacuum your house every 6 months, you got to move the couch, you got to pick up all the rugs, and you got to really do a thorough job. Lubing the chain is the same way. The more frequently you lube the chain, the less dirt and grime is going to accumulate on the chain, and it'll stay cleaner. The whole idea is there are multiple lubes out there to use. This is the first one I grabbed. The whole idea is that lubricant will soften dirt. So I would like to wet the chain. Let it sit just a few moments. Once that penetrating oil and lubricant has softened up all the old dirt and grime, my job then is to see if I can wipe it all back off. If you can get it all off, you're going to take all the dirt that has accumulated on the chain. You'll wipe all that off. This is a really clean chain, so it's a really poor example. But all of this dirt that I wiped off the chain is not lubricant. It doesn't need to be on the chain. All of the parts of the chain that need lubricated are deep down inside the chain, and I can't wipe that off with a rag. So you soak this thing, let it soften all the old dirt and grease, and then do everything you can to try and wipe all the excess lubricant off, because it's truly excess. What you need is deep down inside the chain. Any excess lubricant just attracts dirt, which then turns the lubricant into almost a paste, almost like toothpaste, and then it wears your equipment out even more. So the key with lubricating is to use the fresh, clean lube to soften the old lube, and then try to wipe all of it off. The cleaner your chain is, in general, the longer it's going to last. As long as it's got lubricant on it, you don't need it to be wet. It just causes more trouble than it's worth. Besides the chain, your derailleurs and brakes, again, they're just springs and cables. So those springs, those return springs on all the brakes and all the derailleurs need to be lubricated so that they can push back. And there are pivots on each one of these parts. The derailleur, front and rear derailleur has 4 pivots, and all 4 pivots need lubricated. And there's a total of 8 small pivots. So the front and back of all 4 pivots, there's 8 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Same thing on the rear derailleur. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Brakes are typically 2 or 3 spots. The left arm, the right arm, and I like to lubricate the quick release because those will freeze up if you don't have to use them very often. So I lubricate the quick releases in the left spring and the right spring.
How much are you putting in?
I'm literally putting in about 2 drops. Just that was 4 drops, about the size of, a dime, about the size of a dime. Yeah, just lube is cheap. So I would recommend using a lot of it, but wipe it all off, because what you need to lubricate is deep down inside and it penetrates in. Having extra lube all over the bike is not going to help anybody. It just makes a mess.
What about cleaning your chain?
cleaning the chain is done with lube. So a lot of people will go so long that it gets all caked up and gummed up, and then you need to either clean it. When I was younger, I used to take it apart and put it in gas so we could clean it. But it's a really easy procedure to do if you just stay on top of it. And that goes right back to that vacuuming analogy. If you use this often and you just wipe the thing down, you never really have to approach cleaning your chain. If you wait every 6 months, you'll have a nasty mess and you'll wear your chains out a lot faster. You're probably better off just replace it at that point anyways. But if you do a quick and easy job of this and stay on top of it, you shouldn't have to do a lot of excess cleaning, because a dry drivetrain will collect a lot less dirt than a wet one.
How do you know when your chain needs to be replaced?
That's a good question. Chains are replaced. Chains are worn out.
That's once a year.
Yeah. Chains are worn out by stretch. They are actually stretched longer. And the longer the chain is, the less smoothly it meshes with the gears on the back and the gears on the front. If you ride with a chain that's too worn and too stretched, it'll damage this rear cassette. And then when you replace the chain, the rear cassette has to be replaced as well. So I use a digital tool that tells me exactly the wear and tear that's on the chain. And based on how much stretch this tool, it's spring loaded, how much stretch the tool can read. So in this case, this chain at brand new, the number is 0.25. And when it's worn out and it's due for replacement, it's at about 0.8. And this one is at 0.44. So it's exactly halfway through its usable life. And the trick to chains is the higher your cadence, the faster your chain, the longer your chain will last. And typically the lighter the rider, the longer the chain will last, because they're not worn out by mileage and they're not worn out by time. They're worn out by being stretched. So you got the big riders that put down a lot of power every time they put that power down. They're actually stretching the chain and wearing on the rivets that hold it together. Where a very lightweight, high cadence rider spins freely, those chains can last 2,000-3,000 miles. And other folks come in at 800 to 1,200 miles in their chains. But it's an easy thing. It's an easy investment, 40, 60 bucks on a chain, than to drop 100 bucks on a cassette. And then the more frequently you change the chain out, the less time you spend cleaning it and keeping it good. So
I think that's all the questions we have. Any last minute tips that you would give? What's your biggest pet peeve? I'll ask that question. What's your biggest pet peeve as a bike mechanic when people come in with their bikes and you're like, gosh, if you had just done this?
Well, I guess the answer to that, the easiest way for me to answer that is that sweat destroys these bikes. And if we're going to answer this question targeted towards the triathlon community, I'm going to say that people don't realize how damaging their sweat is to a bike. When you're outside and riding, all of that blows off of you, and you've got wind coming across the bike, and it actually dries the bike off. But when you're sitting on a trainer inside and sweating all over your bike, that sweat goes somewhere. It goes down inside the cables and it goes down inside the bearings. And I've had to cut bikes apart because the rust from the sweat expands the materials, expands the metals, and locks the bearings into place. I've had to drill cables and housings out of frames. I've had $100 repairs that should have been 15 minutes because people don't clean their bike off or put proper sweat towels down when they're working out on the bike. Rarely do I get a problem bike that's just a total nightmare that's actually out on the road being ridden. Putting your bike on the trainer, it becomes out of sight, out of mind. And you no longer think of it as an actual bike. It becomes a piece of workout equipment in the basement. And then springtime comes, you come to ride it, and it is trashed. So one of my biggest pet peeves would be people not cleaning their sweat off the bike because they just don't understand how much damage they're doing to their own equipment.
So if you want to protect your bike with a towel, you put a bike over the headset and the tri bars.
Yeah, I mean, myself, I drape my towel around my aero bar pads, and I try my best to cover up the brake and the front headset bearing. These headset bearings, they're notorious for just rusting solid because of all the sweat that works its way down the side of here. I've had bottom brackets bearings rust solid just from all the drain coming down from your body while you're riding on the trainer. Yeah, throw a fan on the bike, keep a towel handy, and most of the folks that come in with their bike completely rusted solid like that, they're not surprised when I tell them. Usually they laugh, and it can be disgusting, all the salt and sweat stuff that accumulates in the bike. But if you ask that question, that's my answer. Try to keep the bike free of salt and human debris, and your bike will last a lot longer.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, thank you so much for doing this clinic tonight. Do you want to just give a quick, I think you just said it at the beginning, but just what are some of the things that you offer here at the shop, and where are you located?
Well, we're in Hilliard on Cemetery Road. I've been working on bikes since I was in the 8th grade, so 20 plus years. My staff's in the same boat. We've got, between 4 of us, we've got 100 years of bike knowledge, right? So I started with, out on my own I started my own, bicycle business in about 2011, 12. And we do fittings, which is a very important thing for the triathlete. We service any and all types of bikes. We sell electric bikes, mountain bikes, road bikes, anything that you would use on the trail. Personally, I'm a mountain biker. I love to mountain bike. As far as plugging the shop, this year is going to be a busy year. 2021 is going to be a holdover from 2020. It's going to be a busy year. And my suggestion is, if you need something, give us a call and act sooner than later, because product is going quick and supply is low, and a little prudent action now will save you a lot of headache down the road, and be better for us to not have everyone in here in June. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, we appreciate it. And this again was Bill with Cyclical Nature. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.